Welcome back, everyone. Please welcome Professor Malcolm Sparrow for our second instalment.
Two.
Thank you. Malcolm, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for coming back. I never take that for granted. I appreciate it. Except one person's missing over there. I can tell. So we covered two. If you're making shorthand notes, the first one was legal versus expert and all the issues on there. The second one, my shorthand for it, thanks to the economists, is plus plus versus minus minus. Does it matter? Does it make a difference? Yes, it does. The importance of checking your operational balance between those two and separating it from the political communication strategy, the deliberate decoupling. So I'm moving on now to number 3 and 4, which we will do before lunchtime. If you had to say with this one, what does it mean to be risk-based? If it means anything at all, I think it would mean, please just check that you're paying enough attention to the left-hand side, that you have, however good and effective your big, broad, positive outreach programs are, and I'm sure they are. Don't assume that they are comprehensive. Don't assume that everybody is motivated to respond, and make sure that you've got the efficient mop-up operation that you need here on the left. During the break, I did just remember one last question. I should probably ask you about this. Do you believe in evidence-based policy? Is that a thing in Australia? Talk about being evidence-based? Yeah. What does it mean in Australia?
I think it's an identification of industry-suitable understanding.
Industry-suitable understanding?
Yes, that involves.
I don't know what that phrase means, but it sounds ominous. What kind of academic discipline is involved if you say I need evidence-based policy? It's very much a research focus. Probably if you had to pick a domain, it's social science. And at least in the US, the nature of the research operation is very heavily focused on program evaluation. The notion that if government's going to spend a lot of money on big, expensive programs, we should at least check through research, empirical research, whether they actually have the effect that they're supposed to have. So the kinds of analysis work that's done are the manipulation of experiments, proper randomized controlled tests, and the ability to draw causal links between what it is you do and the social outcomes that are supposed to be positive. Curious question. Which of these two pieces, of understanding that these are different operations, which of these two pieces is susceptible to evidence-based policy? I'm hearing all over the map. I believe actually it applies more obviously and readily to the things on the right, because these are predominantly big, permanent, widespread programs. They are therefore costly, and they are persistent over time. And if you've got any big programs which are big, permanent, and expensive, it would be professionally irresponsible not to evaluate them from time to time to make sure that you were not wasting either people's money or your intrusion into their lives. The work on the left, how is it different? It tends to be unique, it tends to be smaller scale, it tends to be a lot of different rock pools, all unique. Maybe haven't seen any of them before. The idea of setting up a randomized controlled experiment on the left is often very complex because you don't have n equals 50 or greater to get statistically valid solutions. Does that mean that analysis belongs on the right and analysis has no place on the left? No, it means a perfectly different kind of analysis is operating on the left. What is the nature of it? A lot of it is searching for patterns and trends and clusters that you otherwise wouldn't know about if you didn't go hunting for them. So a lot of it is pattern recognition, not program evaluation. And then as you've identified each one and you figure out how this thing works, how this poverty trap works, how this particular harm concentration works, then you do, of course, want to be able to monitor whether it's fixed or not. But once it's fixed, you usually cannot prove causality, and you usually don't need to because it's a one-time thing and you've moved on. There's a huge debate going on in academia because the proponents of evidence-based policy want to evaluate everything, and those that understand the problem-solving world, which is a bit lower level and much more dynamic and a lot more unique things, say you can't apply that here, and by the way, we don't need to. Can be a pretty bitter dispute. You know why they say academic disputes are so bitter? Because there's so little at stake. So what they lack in significance, they make up for in bitterness. Such is the world in which I live. Yes, and if you're going to be really, really good at this and you spot rock pools or you spot emerging risks early and suppress them quickly, one of the frustrating things for those that believe in program evaluation is often your efforts will not show as statistically significant changes. If you're really good, you jump on things early before they get to be huge. You don't wait for them to be large and then drive major reductions. You do it quickly, nimbly, and creatively, and often your best successes in the risk control domain are not visible under the lens of program evaluation. I don't know whether that's of any interest to you, but for those of, if you're being pushed in the evidence-based policy domain and you're not quite sure it doesn't seem quite right to you, but you're not exactly sure why it doesn't seem quite right to you, send me an email. I'll send you papers on this that I have had to write within academia in order to try and get some good sense injected in this space. I'm going to move on to number 3. And this is a simple shorthand for this one is the emergence of craftsmanship. And it's a very simple, practical idea, being a craftsman, being a craftswoman. You're in your craft shop, you're master of all your tools. Doesn't matter whether you're doing quilting or metalwork or woodwork or whatever. My hobby is carpentry. I'm not particularly good at it, but I enjoy it. I'll come back to that in a moment. The simple notion of craftsmanship, master of all of your tools, comes as the antidote, pleasant antidote to two unpleasant realities in the regulatory space, which may be familiar to you. One of them is called the swinging of the regulatory pendulum, which you in Australia know better than anyone else on earth because of all your rich reservoir of regulatory scholars and big concentration at RegNet at ANU and John Braithwaite and Valerie Braithwaite and all of their scholarly friends. They have written extensively about the swinging of the pendulum. It normally goes like this. When a problem is seriously out of control and society knows it and gets alarmed, we then create a new governing apparatus and we expect it to act swiftly. So it tends to be vigorous, energetic, adversarial, enforcement-centered, and they do fine work for 5 years or so. And then at that point, you've driven all of the irresponsible people out of the industry, and those that are left have got the message, and they're mostly more inclined to cooperate. And if you persist in this style and with this tool selection, you can make yourself so incredibly unpopular that you will run then into an existential crisis. So you tend to back off at that point and become softer and friendlier and use a variety of methods other than enforcement that assumes a positive motivation in the industry. And you could swing, this is the other swing of the pendulum. You could even go so far as to call the people that you regulate your customers, which is quite far over and is quite dangerous. They're not your customers. But that's kind of where it belongs on that end of the spectrum. And your work then is more, you've emphasized preventive and partnership, and you might even talk about collaborative problem solving. That one, there's not necessarily anything soft about this, but it often comes along at the same time. historically, that the pendulum is swinging away from enforcement-centered traditions. You're looking for other broader methods. So a lot of people think that problem solving is soft. It is no way is it soft, no way does it put aside the enforcement tools. It is just ruthlessly analytical in a way that we were not before. Anyway, so that's the swinging of the pendulum. If you go push this too far this way, then what happens? Predictable as anything. A plane crashes, or a bank fails, or something awful happens, a chemical plant blows up, and people say, what were you thinking? That this industry, source of these risks, was your customer. Wake up. And they shove your pendulum way back over here, get serious, take firm action, they run a royal commission, whatever it takes. And if you can't then demonstrate that you still have teeth, then you'll lose the job, somebody else will get it. And you'll be sidelined as a technical consultant or something like that. So that's the natural swinging of the pendulum. Period, the period of the swing, according to John Braithwaite and his friends, can be 10 to 20 years or so for a big, well-established organization. I believe that craftsmanship dispenses with the swinging of the pendulum. We don't need it. There's no reason for it to swing if you understand craftsmanship. The second thing that we observe that craftsmanship fixes is the persistence of ideological camps within organizations, sometimes within regulatory organizations, where people believe in one set of methods or the other. Occasionally this happens with the passage of time. You get mergers and acquisitions in the regulatory space. I recently, well, not so recently now, maybe 10 years ago, was with a new agency in Washington I hadn't met before, and I spent a day or two with them, and there was a lot of sort of hidden tension under the surface that no one would really talk about. And as I was leaving, somebody said, "Oh, do you realize there's a real problem here?" I said, "No, I've been trying to figure out what it was." He said, "We never got over our merger." I said, "Well, how long ago was your merger?" And they said 16 years. And they had merged an enforcement operation with a technical consultancy, and they had never got over this merger. And the two sides did not appreciate the work of the other, and they all thought that they were right. Would you like to hear a strange feature of my professional life? Well, I don't care. You're going to hear it anyway. A strange feature of my professional life is that I get an email. The phone doesn't ring anymore. It's always email. From a new regulatory agency that I've never met before, and many of them are in Washington, D.C., federal. I thought I'd met them all, the federal regulators, but no, I keep on discovering new ones. It's like there's an infinite supply of them. But they say, "Oh, Professor Sparrow, you're the regulatory guy, come work with us." And I think of this like a first date. You know, a bit scary, don't know if we're going to get along, don't know if we're going to have anything to talk about, and certainly don't know if there's going to be a second date. But why not? Give it a go. I go down, I spend a day with them, or maybe 2 days, and it is often no later than coffee time on the first day when somebody comes and whispers in my ear, confidentially. And I've never met this person before, and what they're doing is telling me what they want me to say to their agency. This did not happen at coffee time here today, I am pleased to report. I always am available, I'm listening for it, but it didn't happen here. But it often does. But before, because whatever it is they want me to say, apparently they've been saying and not getting through. So they imagine it would help if a Harvard professor said this to the agency. Little do they know how little that helps, but they think it does. But before they tell me what it is they want me to say, they identify themselves by camp. Strange language. They say, "I'm in the enforcement group." They don't say camp. Or they say, "I believe in enforcement." And then I put out my hand and say, "I don't need to hear anymore. I know the whole paragraph. I've heard it so many times. I believe in enforcement. As senior leadership doesn't. This agency has lost its way. We talk about the industry as our customer. This is so naive, it's just not true. We are, just a disgrace as an agency. We need to get back to enforcement. Nothing works like enforcement. And these people pound the table. I don't know why, but they're table pounders. Or they say the opposite. There's an umbrella term in Washington, Federal Service, for everything other than enforcement. I don't know if you use this vocabulary. They call that the voluntary compliance camp. Do you have that? It means in Washington everything other than enforcement. Of course, we admit if you really press us, we have to have enforcement, but it's better not to speak of it. It's embarrassing. It upsets our customers. It's politically a little acrimonious. All these other methods we use, the story goes, we're using innovative methods with broader reach, which do a lot more good and cause less political grief. They don't upset our industry, and therefore don't upset the minister. Curious thing in Washington, in the Federal Service, is they don't have to tell me which camp they're in. I can tell by looking at them. That's because of the demographic characteristics of the Federal Service. These, in Washington, these are men. They're in their 40s and 50s. It's their second career. They had a career in the police service or in the FBI or Secret Service, and now they've got a second career after doing 25 years as an investigator or even intelligence analyst or a frontline inspector. So they've carried guns, they've had fights, they've made arrests, they've dealt with nasty bastards. They're a bit cynical about human nature. They're very easy to spot physically because they still spend a lot of time in the gym. And they love to wear really tight T-shirts that make that obvious to everybody, especially the ladies. And if that's not enough to identify them, look, they all sit in the back row. They wear dark sunglasses, even in dimly lit rooms. They sit with their arms folded, looking at the door. That's law enforcement habit. I know. I was in it for 10 years. By contrast, these are more women. They're 10 years younger, 15 years younger. No law enforcement background, never made an arrest, haven't fought with anybody since they fought with their 7-year-old sister. But they're better dressed, they're very articulate, they're better educated. Liberal arts education, politically well connected, very intelligent. And the political often Schedule C political appointees in the Federal Service, which run down many, many ranks in some regulatory organizations, especially the EPA. Much nicer people to hang out with, actually, even for an ex-cop than these ex-cops. And they're not nice to each other. They spend their time undermining each other's careers, and they all think they're acting in the public interest. It is very sad to watch. There is a whole predictable history that an agency will go through which involves the enforcement agents losing, becoming disenfranchised, rapid drops in enforcement numbers even though no one asked for that, and then a sudden scurrying to figure out, well, what's the right performance metric if it wasn't enforcement outputs? Anyway, and the two groups are meanwhile not being nice to each other. The girls call the guys dinosaurs. Remnants of a bygone era. Come on, get with it, get modern. We don't do that anymore. And what do the guys say to the girls in this case? Look, dear, let me explain some things to you. I've been around, I know how the world works. These corporations, that enter your partnership programs, you know why they do that? Because they're using you as a buffer against us. If we weren't here, they would not give you the time of day. They are not interested in protecting the environment or occupational safety. They have a fiduciary responsibility. They're shareholders to maximize profits. The only way that you can make them take those concerns seriously is if it hits their bottom line. That's what we do when we find them, and we make it hit their bottom line and their reputational concerns. If it weren't for us, they wouldn't give you the time of day. Come on, wake up. This is not nice. And I don't know what you'd do if this was my daughter and my son, I think I'd lock them together in a room and say, the two of you may not come out until you've agreed one thing. You're interested in the same goals. You're just fighting over the tools. That makes no sense. Makes no sense at all in the context of craftsmanship. So let's agree the goal. Now here you have to choose one. You have to choose one from the first design dilemma. You can choose the expert model and focus on risk and risk reduction, or if you prefer the legal model, you can put compliance management there instead. You've still got, under that goal orientation, 1 million different tactics that you might choose. What have you done to them all? All the issues of which tools count, all the issues of whether to be harsh and aggressive and soft or friendly. And by the way, this one, which is a surprise to a lot of people, do you want to be reactive or preventive or proactive? The answer is all of these are demoted to the tactical level. All of these are questions that you should not decide in general or at the strategic level. You should be master of all of these. This, like a good theater company, you can be harsh and aggressive when you need to. You can be soft and friendly and clarify the rules when that's the right thing to do. You know, if you're dealing with a piece of the industry and they don't understand the requirements because your rules are poorly written, don't think about enforcement. Think about clarification and an amnesty period and come into line, and then a month from now we'll chase the laggards. And if you're dealing with organized crime, don't think about education or partnership. You need surgery. You know, when people, you know, as they sort of go up through the ranks, occasionally I get to talk to them about what they're going to say to the press, because the press is going to want to know, you know, the new commissioner, what's your position? Are you going to be more enforcement-centered? Are you going to sort of pally up to industry? Which way is our pendulum going to swing under your tenure? And my advice is the answer should always be, I am prepared to use the full range of regulatory interventions. And then they'll press. So does that mean a bit more enforcement? I am prepared to use the full range of regulatory interventions. Does that mean you're going to cozy up to industry now, which is what industries are? I am prepared to use the full range of regulatory intervention. And eventually they'll hear that and say, well, how will you decide? Answer, it depends what problem I'm working on and which segment of the market, and I need first to understand not only their incentives, but their capabilities as well. Then I will decide. Craftsmanship. Clear statement that you're master of all of your tools. You have no preference for any of them. There's no place for believing in one set of tools or another. This one is a little bit of a surprise. Some people say, surely you prefer, Professor, we must prefer prevention to a cure. After all, the medical profession does, right? Really? I had people say that so often I had to go read the medical literature. Do you actually, as a general matter, prefer prevention to a cure? I hunted the medical literature, particularly bits of it I could understand, looking for a clue. I thought I had found a relevant piece of literature, and I found a book which is called Is Prevention Better Than a Cure? It's a beautiful little book by a lady called a physician, B. Louise Russell. I would utterly recommend it to you. You can read it in an hour on one plane flight. What do you think is her answer? Is prevention better than a cure? The answer is, it depends on the nature of the disease. Utterly. There is no general preference in the medical field. Smallpox, we managed to eradicate it. Declared eradicated, I forget what year, about 1970. 2 years. WHO has seen no cases, so they declare eradicated. Well, why did we do that with smallpox, but we've never done that with the common cold, which would be useful? Well, because you can with smallpox. It doesn't mutate. There is a vaccine that survives hot and cold temperatures and doesn't have nasty side effects, and is active for a good long time. It also shows its symptoms soon after contagion, so you can use ring containment strategies to control local outbreaks. And the combination of vaccination and ring containment means we can eradicate it. We did. Common cold is not like that a bit. There's 65 varieties around at any one day. You never get the same cold twice. The one you get today is different from the one that you got last time because you're immune to the one you got last time. And we don't normally worry about it because it doesn't normally kill people unless you have an immune-compromised group, especially vulnerable, or it turns into bronchitis or pneumonia, and then we intervene. Other than that, we deal with comfort, over-the-counter cough drops and medications and things. Cancer. Do we do mostly prevention or reaction? The medical field, the public health field, is mostly reaction. They are searching high-risk populations to detect tumors after they've started, but before they get to be, the path to fatality. It's early intervention is the point on which the public health system depends. There's a whole chronology in the unfolding of any risk. And as you look across this long, complex chronology, you are looking for efficient points to intervene, where you have an available technology, where it's within your jurisdiction or those of your available partners, and everything else being equal, sooner rather than later, because then less harm might be done. But is everything else equal? What happens if you go sooner? You actually have to reach broader and reach a lot more people, and you're not so targeted or focused. So picking the balance between big, broad, and early, and waiting too long being highly narrow and focused is a real art. Sliding up and down the chronology of any risk, picking the best time for intervention. Anyway, that's a simple idea, craftsmanship. My retirement vision when I'm done with academia is that I'll have the most beautifully equipped and spacious workshop with all the latest and best, lathes and drill presses and table saws and everything that I need, and happy grandchildren running in and out, proudly with their projects. And as my occupational safety friends say, yes, and various limbs missing. No, my machines will be perfectly safe, properly guarded. For now, it's just an area in my basement where I go, and there's all my tools, and it's where I go to make things or mend things. When I walk into my little workshop there in the basement, I do not walk in with a tool-based mindset. If I did, figure what it would sound like. Today, hammering. Today, I believe in the hammer. It will make no sense. Or worse, I am behind in my quota of holes. So I must drill by coffee time 300 holes maximum to at least 3 inches and 1/4 inch round. If you did think in terms of quota for holes, what would you do? You'd probably pick rubbish bits of wood out of the bin, drill holes in them, throw them away again. Count the holes. Utterly useless work. And by the way, fill up the air with sawdust, which is dangerous in a basement with inadequate ventilation and an ignition source, as you well know. No, doesn't make any sense to prefer this or to have quotas for that. And I have to say, sadly, I find regulators doing completely useless work sometimes because they walk in with a tool-centered focus. Or they've got a quota for this many of this and this many of that. And I'm thinking, well, why can't you exercise craftsmanship? Answer, and they're not daft people. Often they've got PhDs in engineering or natural sciences or something like that, as have many of you. Why is it that regulators will behave in a tool-centric way when obviously you want this task-centric performance? Often it's the way they're held accountable by central agencies of government who don't distinguish between the regulatory task and other customer service tasks, who want the same kind of widget count and productivity metrics that you can get from other agencies. That's not appropriate. It's a misunderstanding. They certainly haven't figured out what's special about the regulatory performance story, which is an important piece of work. And on other occasions, I find it's because of the way the money flows. The budget structure is a problem because there's a separate budget for hammering. And there's a separate budget for sandpaper. And now we just added a whole new program with its own budget, which is for negotiated settlements or something in between arbitration and conciliation. And you don't have the freedom to move money between these different things. It's a strange idea. It's a real constraint on regulators. If were working full-time as a carpenter and you asked me at the beginning of the year to set a budget, how many hours with the hammer, how many hours with the drill, how many hours with the sandpaper, not knowing in advance whether I would be building chess sets, mending boats, or going out in a van to mend bridges. That would be an incredibly difficult thing to determine up front. Craftsmanship would say, please, can we keep the actual allocation of budget across different functional areas rather fluid and flexible, so that task by task by task I can make all of these adjustments. That seems to be a natural consequence of such an orientation. I want to leave this and go on to number 4, because 3 goes with number 4. If any 2 of these are aligned, it's 3 and 4. But I just want to ask you one question about craftsmanship. You understand what the craftsman's head is doing? What the nature of the job is? So I'm making this chair, but before they put the leather cover on, there's probably a bit of 1-inch plywood in the seat and another piece of 1-inch plywood here with foam on top and then the leather cover. But this angle, this joint to be made, has to be quite strong, and it's about 110 degrees, not 90. So I'm looking at that job to be done, and I'm figuring out, well, do I have the tools to cut that joint and make it this way? And a very common experience in the craft shop is, oh, I don't have the tools for that. In which case you must now either run down the hardware store and buy them, if somebody else ever had that problem. That's like borrowing somebody else's program idea. Or, more commonly, make the tools that you need out of parts that you already have. Actually do a little bit of tool making, and then get to work back on the task. The equivalent in your space is tailor-made program in response to a carefully identified need. That's ordinary in the craft shop. One question about craftsmanship in your agency, assuming big, complex agencies, who gets to exercise that mindset? I give you 3 simple choices. The frontline field agents, inspectors, auditors, examiners, investigators, frontline, or middle management, or the senior executive team. Where do you think it sits in the organization? Middle management. Any other votes? Everyone. Because tasks can be small, medium, or big. Other votes? You should certainly be able to deal with small, medium, and huge tasks, and that might escalate up through the management ranks. I think the answer in the end is mostly, routinely, this sits with middle managers. Why? Well, your frontline staff may be more versatile or creative, some of them, than others. But do they have governance? Can they actually control lots of other parts of the agency? They usually don't have the authority or the reach. They might see problems and feed them up, but somebody needs to be able to say, oh, the solution to this problem is, first of all, 2 enforcement cases to be made, and then a particular publicity campaign to get the message out, and then maybe an amnesty period and a follow-up operation. It's not one tool, it's like 6 in a sequence involving lots of specialists. You have your specialists and you still need them. A lot of your frontline folks are specialists. You do need your dangerous dogs. Do you have those? What's a dangerous dog in Australia? Pit bull? Rottweiler? You need some pit bulls who are really good at biting people. You need them. It's a special skill. You should probably keep them lean and mean and hungry and locked up most of the time. You do not want to send them out roaming the streets for targets of opportunity. But you need them on occasions as part of your protocol for dealing with an issue. And you need your softest and gentlest and most friendly partnership people and educators and conciliators over here. Different skills. You can't expect chameleon-like versatility from your staff. We've actually got studies that show that induces psychological stress. People don't know what they're good at, and they're expected to lurch from one tool to another day by day by day. So not the frontline staff, because usually you've got to go up a few ranks before you can govern them and sequence them and apply them in combination to a task. What about the senior executive team? What's their role? They are dealing with long-term strategic planning, often a 3-year cycle, a 5-year cycle, setting big important decisions about the capabilities of the organization and where it will be focused. But the problems that come through your craft shop come a bit quicker than that. It's not a 3-year thing. It's like every month there's a new one. You've got to be constantly managing the portfolio of risks, seeing which ones we're going to pay attention to. It's a much more dynamic, faster moving environment. So I think the role with respect to craftsmanship of the senior executive team is to determine whether this is a capability we care about, and to be clear where it will sit in the organization, and what kind of decisions will we expect people to make, and what kind of forbearance will we give them so that they can experiment and make errors, and eventually alight on a proper solution. They are setting the scene, but I think most of this work ends up happening at the middle management ranks. That's my gut instinct on the subject. I'm going on to number 4. They're connected. I'm going to show you this picture. I don't know if you've seen it before. Have you? Where is it? It's on the front cover of my book. Yes, I'm glad you noticed. Appreciate that. I actually really like this picture because I took it myself. I wanted a really good knot to go on the front cover of the book. And the editor said, "Oh, that's not your problem. Why don't you check our digital archives? They are very extensive." And I checked the digital archives at Cambridge University Press. They were incredibly extensive, and they had more than 500 pictures of knots in their standard digital archive. I didn't like any of them. I said to him, I can do better than that myself. He said, I really wish you wouldn't. I wish you'd just write the book. To which I said, well, you know, the older I get, the more of a morning person I become. It happens to most of us in the end. I can't really write much after about 3 p.m. and then the light's better in the afternoon anyway for photography, so I'll do it as a reward. I took over 400 pictures of knots, including 18 pictures of this knot. They said they really liked this knot in the end because there's no rope coming out of one side. Why is that significant? Because if you rotate it 90 degrees clockwise, there's space for the title. I wish they had told me that up front. That would have saved all the other 382 pictures that had ropes coming out of every side. I not only took this picture, I actually went to, in Live Free or Die country, New Hampshire, I went to the Marine Surplus Supply Store in Meredith because I didn't have, you know, good-looking ropes like this. And this, the nature of a marine supply store is like a long grassy field with a huge iron rusty warehouse in the middle of it. And there's anchors and boats and trailers all lying around all over the place, bit of a mess. Lots of endless cupboards inside full of bits. And there's not a woman in sight. It's all men rummaging through buckets for the part that they need to mend their marine engine. They all got greasy fingers, oily hands, lots of facial hair. That's not so many teeth. That's Live Free or Die country. And in this environment, I go to the man who works at the desk. His name is George, and I said, I need some good-looking, old-fashioned ropes with some texture and preferably some color. Looked at me very suspiciously. I was, by the way, way too well dressed for him. And he said, what for? Why don't you buy the modern, you know, polyester ones, the flat yellow ones. He said they come much longer lengths, they're much more reliable, they're stronger, they're cheaper per foot. They have 2 other advantages. They float. These would sink when they're wet. And he said they don't rot. These would rot if you leave them wet. I said, well, no, you don't understand. I need to tie knots and take pictures of them and put them on the front cover of my book. Now he looked at me like I was from some other planet. But he threw a heap of ropes together, 5 of them, including these 2, and said I could have them all for $5. Which was way too cheap. I paid him 10 because they were stunningly beautiful in my opinion. And then 9 months later, I took him a copy of my book. And he didn't even remember me. So this was a very humiliating day. And I haven't shown my face in the marine surplus supply store ever since. Anyway, what's the point? The whole point, even while I'm telling you my silly story about George, is I know what your brain is doing confronted with this image. You can't help yourself. You have conducted stage 1 epidemiological analysis. Many of you have already graduated to stage 2 because this image does it to you. Stage 1, figure out the structure of the thing, like the epidemiologist staring through the microscope. What is this thing? How does it work? What is its structure? What are the dynamics? I just want to understand the way it is. And if you weren't entirely sure, you're viewing this image from one side, you just want to have a quick look at the back to check that you've got it all right. And this is way, way within your comprehension. In fact, some people have very good 3-dimensional analytic skills and could memorize this in a minute. Do you think you could? I let you look at the picture for 1 minute, then I take the picture away, I give you the ropes. Can you recreate it? I'm seeing a few yeses and a lot of no's. I don't know what makes the difference. And many of you graduated beyond stage 1. Stage 2 epidemiological analysis begin now, I understand the structure, to figure out the weaknesses of the thing itself. If you asked to attack it, in this case to undo it, and I had to be very careful, I wanted to draw a knot which was not functional, not a useful knot, not a yachting knot, not one that one where the assumption would be if I gave it to you, your job is to get rid of it. And you've already figured out which loop gives way first. What loosens up most easily, and then what happens then, and you have to pass the ends through this loop, and now what? And if you understood the structure, you have a sequence of a plan, and you probably might have to, if it's complicated, you have to do a little experimentation along the way. But if you really follow your understanding of the structure, you come up with a plan that's unique, effective, and it's just gone. Risk eliminated. Wouldn't that be nice? That's stage 2 epidemiological analysis. And this image triggers that. That's what I wanted on the front cover. What is it about this image that makes that happen in your head? Apart from it being beautiful in my view as a photographer, I think it's the right level of complexity. There's a whole spectrum of complexity, and at one end of the spectrum is something simple and familiar like a reef knot that you've seen a million times and you knew it as a kid and you were taught as a Boy Scout or Girl Scout how you untie reef knots in a hurry. And if I'd shown you that, you're not interested. Your brain goes somewhere else. And the opposite end of the spectrum, there's a ball of wool, a cat's been playing with it for half an hour. It's a hopeless, tangled mess, and you're not interested in that one either, intellectually. You just want to throw it away. This one is curiously in the middle of the spectrum of complexity, and there's only 2 ropes, and there's about 6 or 7 elements that make up this knot. Not so many that you probably couldn't memorize it eventually. Well, I have a strange hypothesis. I think this is about the level of complexity of many major regulatory problems. They're serious, they're persistent, but they're not like any other risk. They've each got their own unique structure, but absolutely not beyond your comprehension. And if you comprehend the structure and took the time to do that, we would pretty easily work out an appropriate solution for such a thing. I don't know if you know, but I'm told by psychologists, the skills, the cognitive skills that you employ on this perfectly naturally are not ones that you were born with. You learn them between the ages of about 4 and 7 on average. 4 and 7, that probably means some of you got young kids who haven't learned them yet. Now, what's their experience? They're late for school in the morning, their shoelace is tied in a knot. What's their plan? What's their approach? It's a generic one, right? Pull and tug and hope, pretty much. They're not understanding the special structure of the thing. They're probably not even looking at it. They're talking to their friends on Facebook or Instagram, whatever the latest thing is, at the same time. They have a general plan of attack, and they apply it to the knot, and as a result of it being a general plan, not tailored to the specifics, they make it worse. And after a little while of failing with the general plan, they hand it over to mum or dad, and you discover just how much worse they made it. Right? I used that story about the little kid not having learned these skills in a speech on regulatory practice the year the book came out. That was 2008. It was the first time I'd ever talked about knots and the undoing of them, and in public, and it was a huge conference, Canadian Federal Regulators, annual convention, 400 or 500 people. They had a big stage, 3 times the height of this one. Before and after I was done with my talk, and before I could get off the stage, a man comes up the steps and wants to talk to me. He's pointing at me, he's visibly flustered. He said, "Professor," he points at me and says, "Professor, I have to talk to you about that child." And I'm thinking, oh goodness, what did I say? What cultural sensitivity have I just trampled for Canadians? Are all Canadian children brilliant at birth? No, I didn't have to say anything. He had to get something off his chest. He said, "I am convinced my agency acts like that child." Then he explains. He says, a new environmental problem comes along. That was my first clue as to who he was. He was senior environmental official with EC, Environment Canada, as it was then. He said, a new environmental problem comes along. We have a general approach to all of these things. We jump right into action. Then he stops and takes a huge breath and says, "I think that more often than not, we make things worse first." I didn't know what to say. You know, because I have the title professor, people ask me questions. Questions end in a question mark. There was no question mark there. It was a statement. In fact, it was a confession. I am not a priest. I do not know how to give forgiveness or absolution or anything that priests might know how to do. I felt sorry for the man. I had to say something. I said, "Don't tell anyone until you've figured out how to make your organization slow right down. You need to look carefully at the thing, understand its structure and dynamics, and it's not beyond your comprehension. It's probably no more complex than this." I think this is about as complicated as your flammable cladding problem. 4, 5, 6 factors all rolled in there. Probably not more than that. Not beyond your comprehension at all. And that doesn't mean there's an easy solution, right? It's easy to apply this model when you talk about cognitive skills. But let's talk about the behavior of a big organization that has harm reduction or risk control responsibilities. I know this looks like a complicated chart. It really isn't. And I drew it first in 1998. It hasn't changed since then, except for the title, because I found simpler language from what I had before. Society is worried about something bad. So this is like too many people dying at work. We must invent an occupational safety agency. That happened in the US in 1970. Same year, so much pollution that the canals were actually catching fire. That's not good. And so we must create the EPA. Same year. A big bad general thing. Notice it's in the outside world. We haven't done anything yet. This is government level. And it's vague. It's a huge class of risks. So it tends to have very short descriptions, like 1 or 2 words. Industrial pollution, violent crime, political corruption, occupational hazards. It's a huge, big class of things, but we are sufficiently, and I'm not much of an artist, but that's supposed to look big and bad. I hope it does. The deficiency is not mine, it's Bill Gates. It's shapes available in PowerPoint. Unless you start drawing your own. Anyway, so we notice this thing. What do? Then we create a new public agency or a control apparatus of some kind with an idea. Let's develop a general idea. How will we deal with this class of things? Now, once we've got our general idea, of course, the country is rather large. So we have to have regional offices, and we've got to have functional specialization, and we've got to have an organization using organizational theories. But first, it would be nice to know what is our general strategy. And I spend a lot of time working with regulators to understand what is their strategy and where did it come from. I'll give you some simple ideas from different fields. OSHA in America for a good long time was unannounced on-site inspections with the use of no discretion, cite everything, and then rely on general deterrence. Fear is the instrument that will bring 7 million workplaces into compliance. That was their theory. One tool approach for a good long time, over 20 years. Police theory. In what's called the professional era of policing, we have 2 ideas. Rapid response to emergency calls. You make the promise that you call will come, we'll get there fast. That should help arrest offenders and save lives. And then we'll have detectives investigating reported crime. Those 2 things, if done well, should control crime. That's a theory for a period. Environmental protection. If you think most of your pollution comes from industrial plants, we have a general theory about that. We'll permit them. License to operate. Permits specify conditions, limits to what goes out through the smokestack, the water pipe, transportation of hazards and toxics, and so on. And then our operation is to monitor the compliance with the conditions attached to the permits that we gave you. That's how we will do this, which of course works great for many things. Until along come environmental problems which are nothing whatsoever to do with your industrial facilities. Like we have mercury airborne from Mexican power plants. Then it gets washed down in the rain, falls in the Finger Lakes, poisons the fish and the trees. Or you have sick office buildings, or you have radon in the homes, or endangered species, nothing to do with pollution. So then you've got to think a bit differently. From time to time, your theory gets challenged. But if you have a theory, you construct big programs. The shape of these programs tends to be either functional programs like inspection, audit, investigation, education, partnership, or they are processes that have to be managed. And boy, oh boy, VBA has got a whole bunch of new processes coming online. Whole new populations to be registered and licensed, applications to be reviewed. These are core, transaction-rich environments that are worth engineering. By a process, I mean a repetitive thing with a load of at least hundreds and more likely thousands, tens of thousands, or even millions of transactions flowing through. Paying Medicare claims, processing tax returns, core processes. So that's what you construct. Big engines, big machines, we split up the work, we hand it out, we have an organizational theory that governs it, and we do the job well. One of my more cynical Kennedy School colleagues calls this the think once and then act for 15 years model. Construct your general theory and then build these beautiful machines to carry it out. And no one really has to think very hard what they're going to do on Tuesday because it's a continuation of what they did on Monday. There's a predictability to this type of work. This is program-centered work, where the programs are functional or process-based. And what we are observing is agencies learning quite a different method, which is called problem-centric. You look more carefully at this big class. Oh, political corruption, is that one thing? Of course it isn't. It's at least 57 varieties. So first thing you have to do is disaggregate it and identify the little pieces, and the strange language here is passing the risk, pattern recognition, cluster identification, finding concentrations or trends, emerging patterns. And these are supposed to still look bad, but they're smaller, and they're all in different dimensions. So sometimes, the environment region, I think, has the highest number of dimensions in which they can define problems. Sometimes it is a bad firm that's bad 1 million times over and in every way. Well, that's worth focusing on. Sometimes it's a particular chemical that we should now worry about, or a method of disposing of a particular chemical, like household flushing of bleach down the toilet system, or it's an endangered species, or it's a particular technology that comes along that requires our intervention, etc. And sometimes it's natural resources or trapped air basins or lakes that are vulnerable, or ecosystems needing restoring. Lots and lots of different dimensionality in this space. First job as epidemiologists is understand them. You don't get any prizes for that. What you get a prize for is fixing them. And once you operate in the space, you have adopted the mind of a craftsman or woman, and you will most likely be inventing tailor-made solutions that carefully match to this problem. These are often celebrated in government as innovations. It's a very curious connection between this method and innovations. I have a lot of colleagues that study government innovations, and they want to promote government innovativeness. You don't end up doing this because you want to be innovative. You end up being innovative because it's perfectly natural when you focus on tasks, carefully identified tasks at the actionable level. People that weren't ever innovative before become innovative if you require them to fix such things. I don't, you've never done this before, but make this 110-degree join and make it strong. As long as you hold them accountable for fixing the problem, they'll come up with some innovative or relevant solution. What is happening here, do you think? How many of you recognize this as where you live? Jobs that you do. This is the business of disaggregation to the actionable level. That's something that's a bit broad and vague otherwise, right? So what fits here naturally? Data mining, analysis, pattern recognition. But it's not just what the intelligence people called SIGINT, signal intelligence. It's also human intelligence. You've got focus groups. You've got knowledge from abroad. Watching other people's misery in other lands long before it lands here or visits. Alerting yourself to a potential risk, even if it's never happened here. There's a whole bunch of, I class them generally, vigilant systems. Ways of knowing things that you'd otherwise not know, so that at least you have the chance of choosing which ones to act on and what kind of actions are required. Now, I certainly never claim to invent this. That's a mistake a few people have made. I just talk about it a lot because I see it happening all across the regulatory frontier. It is happening naturally. But it's relatively new compared with the establishment of big, broad, complex programs. This mode of operation is way more mature than this one. But almost every regulatory profession is inventing this to some degree and has focused on very specific problems. It happens perfectly naturally. If it's a big, visible crisis, then you have no choice but to focus on it. But when you've done that a couple of times on really big, important crises, and you say, well, hold on a minute, our organization confronted with that crisis acted in a very different way than we normally do, then that raises the question, not only what was this different method of operating, but should we apply it more broadly in the absence of a crisis on lower level things? And the answer is, well, surely yes. You don't want to wait for things to be a crisis. You'd like to be able to spot them earlier and intervene before they got to be so serious. So that's just the problem-centric approach, and this is the program-centric approach, and nor would I ever claim that this is better than that. They're just different. But one very well established and the other relatively young and struggling to compete. It's very hard to compete with a process once you've set it up, because if you get behind in your process management, it will pile up in your face and embarrass you. So you don't have any choice but to keep up with your processes. Your processes are inescapable. Your functions are very comfortable because a whole bunch of people are with a whole bunch of other people a bit like them, with the same background and training, and they go to the same conferences, they know the same sciences. So functions are comfortable, processes are inescapable, and this stuff seems optional and hard to pin down. And if you want to operate in this space, some folks tell me this seems like trying to pin a stretchy balloon to the wall so that you can give it definition and put people in charge and fund it and support it. I don't think it's that easy, actually. I think it's more like trying to pin a vapor cloud to the wall. So much work to be done, nailing it down, defining what the job is, handing it out, holding people accountable. Often agencies don't have any system for that. They've done it successfully in a few cases, but it's often not formally managed. If you recognize the difference, problem-centered work from program-centered work, there's three very simple questions that you should think through. Number one, do you know how to manage this type of work formally? You have extremely formal systems for managing this work. The functions have boxes on your chart. It's part of your organizational structure, clearly defined, with people in charge. The processes are well defined. We learned how to do process engineering. We've created process owners. We know how to do process efficiency upgrades, how to use automation and triage and protocols. So this is all very formal now. This is only formal if you make it so. So question number one, do you know how to manage this formally? Second question, how much of this would you like to do? It's not for me to say. Would you like this to be 5% of your overall effort and 95% that way? Or would you like this to be 25%, which is a substantial investment? Or would you like this to be 80% and that wound down to 20%? These are three very different organizations. There's no right answer, but you ought to know roughly what you think is desirable in your space. And the third question, very complex, state-of-the-art organizational puzzle for regulators. If you're going to do more than a trivial amount of this, I would say more than 5% of your effort, then you've got to start working out the interaction effects. How does this work affect that work, and this work affect that work? And actually, you've got four kinds of work going on all the time in any regulatory agency. You've got your functional work in clearly defined enclaves. You've got your process-based work once you've set them up and the stuff just pours in. You've got your problem-based work if you make space for it and add it to your competence. And you've got crisis response for when something unexpected and horrendous happens and it's all hands on deck. You must deal with it. You've got these four different types of work all within one organization. And no one is teaching organizational theory for regulators. It doesn't exist as a subject. So you feel like you're having to work out all the interaction effects between these four different types of work. And just so you know, these four different types of work have a different idea of professionalism. They have a different class of performance metrics. They need different types of analytic support and different relationships externally. Now you'll begin to understand your life is rich and interesting. If anyone is not convinced that this work is different from that work, I'll just show you some examples of tasks that sit in one quadrant or the other, and just let you see the different features that the task statements have. So let's go in the top right-hand corner first. This is problem-centric tasks. I'm going to show you a whole bunch. I know the rule that you're not supposed to have more than 15 words on a PowerPoint slide. How is this for non-compliance? People complain, your fonts are too small, Professor. Well, I would say if you can't read this in this hall with this very fine projector, then you should not be driving a car. So read a few. and then tell me what do they have as a common property, even though they're in quite different domains. Work to be done. So what's the common property? What I'm thinking of is the answer to a specific question. Which are they vague and loosey-goosey about, and which are they really precise about? Problems or solutions? What are they clearer about? The problem being solved or the preferred solution? Yeah, these are all very clear on what is the preferred solution. In this case, negotiated rulemaking. In this case, the role of civil society. In this case, a very particular sentencing policy. What do they say about the problem being solved? Well, this one is as vague as environmental protection, which I think is a million things. Corruption control, well, there's at least 57 varieties to worry about. Which one are we talking about? Loosey-goosey about the problem, very precise about the proposed solution. Another way of thinking about these is they could be titles for breakout sessions. You know, when you go to a conference and they have a breakout period, there's 5 different sessions to choose from, and you've got to figure out how to spend the next hour of your life. They give you a 1 sentence to help you decide. This is the 1 sentence. If you go to this one, who do you think is going to be talking? A champion of negotiated rulemaking, right? Somebody who had a really fine experience with it in some particular area of environmental protection. And what are they going to be telling this big, broad audience? Not only let me describe my happy experience with this approach, but this is where you should do it too, or some variant of it in your fields. So it's, here's my favorite tool, please take it and do something good with it. This is a baseball analogy. I don't know if you realize that. 3 strikes and you're out. It's a ridiculous game. I've never seen a professional sport that attracted so many ugly men and then taught them to spit the whole time, really quite uncivil. Cricket is so much more gentlemanly, at least in most places. Switch to the bottom left-hand corner. Problem-centric work. I'm disciplining myself here to use roughly the same number of words and all of the same domains, but very different problem statements here. Yeah, read a few. Even smaller font. What have we done to get from the top right-hand corner to the bottom left-hand corner? Yeah, we have switched the specific and the general, that's all. So these are much more specific about what is the problem being solved. It's not a big general class, it's a really specific thing. Defined at what I think is approaching an actionable project level, which is smaller than a class. And what do these say about the solution in which we believe? Zero, nothing. How many words are spent describing our preferred solution? Zero, because these are all stage 1 epidemiological analysis, not yet onto stage 2, right? Now, just describing the way the wretched thing is, and these are abbreviated to make them fit on this slide. I get into trouble in Washington, D.C. With this one, golf courses. You mean there's toxins on golf courses? Because the preferred federal sport in America is golf. I don't know why, but that's what they all like to play. Maybe they all want to play with the president someday because the presidents all play golf. But they get it all alarmed. Say, really, is there arsenic on golf courses? Well, this one actually came from Florida. Department of Environmental Protection many, many years ago. I worked with them as one of my beta sites, and they were developing the Environmental Problem-Solving Program. This was a problem that they took on pretty early. And the problem is arsenic accumulates in the surface waters on some golf courses in Florida. It's caused by the overuse of a particular class of pesticides and fertilizers on putting greens, coupled with not enough irrigation and inadequate rainfall in certain months of the year. And the first sign that you have this problem in your surface waters is a high-frequency appearance of mutated frogs. Lots more frogs being born with wrong number of eyes or legs and other mutations. And if you get a lot of those, it's a very sensitive bioindicator, and you know you've got a toxics problem. You just have to figure out which one it is that you have. So there's the problem. I've just given you the fuller definition. I haven't said anything yet about a solution. First thing I'd ask you to consider is compare the complexity of that problem I just described with the knot, which you can now remember. Which one is more complex? I think the knot. It's got 6 or 7 things going on. This one only has 3 elements at most, and a detection device, environmental indicator. I think this one is actually quite simple. Now I've explained to you the mechanism of the risk. If I made you responsible for this and gave you a team of 4 people and a modest budget, do you think you could fix it across Florida in 6 months? It's dead simple, right? You figure out which golf courses you've heard about already, go visit them, give them information about why not these toxics and pesticides. If you must use those, then at least here's your irrigation schedule. Here's others that you could use instead, and we'd encourage you to switch. Then if they absolutely won't cooperate, think about how you can enforce it on them. Meanwhile, you want to enlarge your monitoring capacity, and we think we should probably enlist the local high school kids on biology field projects, teach them how to do census of mutated frogs. That's what they did. Solved it. Actually, high school kids in Florida are the most amazingly effective partners for the Environmental Agency. They count alligators on the way to school. They learn how to recognize 12 different frog songs and count the frequency and report them all to the agency. Amazing, beautiful collaborative work. Not difficult to fix after you've understood the actual structure. Now, I don't know, I'm kind of curious, which job would you rather be given? A program-centered job or a problem-centered job? And you should bear in mind, I'm not saying that one is better than the other, they're just different. So let's put a team together here. This right-hand side here, you're going to be a program-centered team. And the Prime Minister, do you have a Prime Minister today? You're a bit careless with your Prime Ministers. Let's give you one. I'd like you to reduce drug abuse in the schools throughout Australia by expanding drug awareness resistance programs in the schools. We've got a very specific solution in mind here, and I want you to drive this for a year. And here's your team of 10, high-performance team, budget quite substantial. Get the job done. What does this year feel like in rolling out a program? Well, probably spend the first week trying to figure out, well, what version of the program is it we're going to roll out? There's probably 12 different versions. We'd need to settle on an optimal model if we knew that. You probably realize you can't do the whole country, so you're going to have to figure out priorities, maybe by regions or by level of school or by degree of cooperation. Or whatever. So there's a little bit of prioritization and targeting. Your work through most of the year is going to be what? Liaising with relevant school authorities and getting the program implemented. And your performance account at the end of the year is going to be, how many did we do? How many hours did we deliver? How many kids have been exposed? And what's the plan for continued rollout the following year? That's a program-based job. Let's pick one of these. This half, we're going to give you the Prime Minister gives you a problem-centered job. Pick one off the list. I'd like you to reduce the incidence of repetitive back strain injuries in the nursing profession, which is caused by lifting patients without proper equipment, training, or assistance, exacerbated in a hospital setting by the presence of slippery polished floors, which are even more slippery in a humid environment, and occasionally patients who are either obese, uncooperative, occasionally aggressive. Fix it. This is, by the way, the single biggest source of injuries in the nursing profession, and it's a global problem. More than 50% of nurses eventually leave their career with back injuries of one kind or another. So fix it for Australia. You have 1 year. What's that year feel like? It's a bit different. What do you want to know at the beginning, and who do you want to talk to? You don't do a lot of talking originally with nurses who got injured, maybe with nurses that didn't get injured, maybe with the nurses union and the hospital administrators and the equipment manufacturers and the training designers. A lot of people to gather information from. Then what? Oh, you should do a field trip to Sweden. They always have the best designed equipment. They're brilliant at design. Go there, figure out what state-of-the-art means. And then you're going to be doing a lot of analysis to find out, well, is it particular climates that count, or is it types of ward, or is it the kind of nurse in terms of strength and physical fitness and age, or is it about certain types of patient, or is it about behaviors, or what is it? How is it concentrated? What solutions do we know? Where might we run experiments and test different interventions? And if that goes really quickly all through the year, what's the result that you'd like to be able to put forth at the end of the year? Wouldn't it be nice if you had a statistically valid reduction in the outcome? Do you think you could get that in Australia in 1 year with a substantial investment? Might take 2. It's kind of borderline whether it depends how much you could do in the first year. And if you found one thing that you could really intervene on effectively. If you couldn't get the eventual statistical outcome that you wanted in 1 year, what would you like to be able to show? All kinds of interim measures that showed, oh, we've got better understanding of the equipment, we've got more of it available, we've got increased awareness, we've got better practices incorporated and better training programs. And by the way, we've got a sort of natural science story about how all of these things ought eventually to produce the outcome that we want. So if you can't point to the actual outcome, then you should point to all of these things leading in the right direction and a clear causal connection, mechanism that you can describe. I don't know, which team do you think would be more fun? Program rollout or problem solving? There's no right answer, it's a personal preference. We need both of these. They're quite different types of work. The people that do this kind of work tell me, in retrospect, they have never had a job which is constantly intellectually challenging. Relentless intellectual challenge, day after day after day. And no certainty as to what we're going to be doing a week from now. And they also tell me that in retrospect, it is the most satisfying work they've ever done in government because they can claim with their team members an outcome. These folks can only claim a productivity, an output, an efficiency, a rollout. These folks, they have a degree of certainty and routine, and they might be extremely good at this kind of work. Some people are really good at the process work. You've got a huge load of stuff, it's got to be dealt with accurately and timely, and they love to have a full in tray in the morning and be done with it all by 3 p.m. and sit down and say, no one can do this better than I can. That's a different kind of satisfaction. Different people, different jobs, all of them are valuable. Back to the 3 diagnostic things. Do you know how to manage this work formally? Do you know how much of it you'd like to do as a percentage of your overall effort? And then finally, how are the interaction effects Are they apparent and going to be managed properly? I don't know if you have colleagues who are not convinced that you need a problem-centered capability. If you do, if that's still up for debate in your organizations, I don't think it is. I think most Australians have figured that much out already and are working on implementation and then institutionalization. But if you do have cynics who say, I don't need this, I'm going to close this session with a device that you can use to persuade them. Here's the device. I'm going to give you half a sentence. I'm going to let you finish it. I'd like you to imagine for a moment that this stuff is all perfect. Absolutely perfect. All your functional enclaves are state-of-the-art and brilliant at what they do. All of your processes are sweetly oiled engines working perfectly. Timeliness, accuracy, cost efficiency, all the things that matter in a process setting. That's all perfect too. While all of your programs are working perfectly, the types of risk that nevertheless might not be well controlled are those that, ooh, that's my half a sentence. One more time. Your functional and process programs are all working perfectly. While that is so, the types of risks that nevertheless might not be well controlled are those that, finish this sentence. Evolve. Say a bit more about evolve, like the novel. A different version of it somehow appears. So two possibilities. It could be evolving in the sense that you've never seen this before and it emerges. So that's often to do with new technologies in the building industry or whatever your industry is, high-tech innovation. Or it could be a risk that you were familiar with, but somehow it shifts or alters. Now you've got a different version of it. What else? So something that actually hasn't happened yet, but is possible. So it's very low frequency, hasn't happened yet. Well, why would you worry about it? Because you'd only worry about those if they had substantial implications, and then we call them catastrophic. Very high impact, very low probability, maybe never happened before, but could. The wretched 1 in 100-year event that now seems to happen once every 8 years. Yep, so catastrophic risk, why are they not well governed by your routine operations? There's nothing routine at all about them. And if it's never happened before, they're not even in your database. Others? Other classes of risk? Yes, sir, in the corner. Pardon? Complacency. Yeah, you could have cases pouring through and you're brilliant in your reactive dealing with all these cases that come up, but there are in fact hundreds and thousands of them. And you're just, one idea of satisfaction is we process every case that arises by the book professionally with the correct disposition. But if they keep on coming, you've got a persistent problem. You might want to think differently and take it offline and figure out, why does this keep coming? That's another class. More. Keep going. Yes, sir. Future risks. You mean it's coming along, it will be emerging in the future and you might try and be ahead of it and anticipate it. Lady in black, you're thinking, I know, you're just about to put your hand up. No? Others? Any more? Not visible. Tell me about that. So it's not a brand new one, but we know it happens sometimes because we see some cases, but we don't know the scale or scope because we have a low discovery rate. Yes, those are called invisible risks, those naturally with a very low discovery rate. That's another class. Any more? You guys are good at this. Yes, sir. Well, how come? You mean you're...
Usually when you set up the you want one particular outcome, but as time evolves, that tends to change to a different type of outcome.
Right. And so your goal setting has extended the parameter of your ambition, and now you're going to try and move further in some direction. Yep. Any more? Inherent. What do you mean by that? Can't be controlled. Oh, so give up. No, shift to contingency planning, effective response. If you can't control the frequency, and like with natural disasters you often can't, then you're going to control operations, shifts to a different piece. Yep.
Targets of the
So-
intervention have adapted and evaded your original program.
The wretched people are clever and they're out to beat you. Yes, conscious adversaries, adaptive in their approach, trying to outwit you. That's a pretty good list. I actually have an advantage over you. I meditated on this question for 2 hours. Early one morning with 2 whole pots of coffee. That's my very best time of the day. These are the ones that sprung to my mind, and they're pretty much the same as your list. First of all, catastrophic risks, because there's nothing routine about them. They might not even show at all as data points in your database, and therefore won't be revealed through ordinary retrospective analysis. What do you have to do with these? Hunt the world for clues about what they might be and test rigorously whether it could happen here, and if so, are you prepared or can you prevent? All of that kind of work. Emerging risks, you nailed this one first. Novel and unfamiliar, often to do with new technologies, and it's unlikely that your current programs would control them because they weren't there when your programs were designed. Invisible risks, you just said it. Low discovery rates only partially manifest in what you see, and therefore it could be way more serious than what you see currently and you don't know. Special role with these is the scoping role, the measurement role. Get your hands or arms around the invisible mass. There are methods for that, but that's the distinctive challenge in dealing with these. Risks involving conscious opponents or adversaries. Why are routine controls no use in this case? Because they can study them. It doesn't take long for them to reverse engineer them and work their way around the edges. So now this is a game of constant dynamic intelligence and counterintelligence. You're watching them, they're watching you. You're in a game-playing mode. Boundary spanning risks, you didn't mention this, but I know you know about these because they're written all over your documents. And collaboration between different regulatory agents, evidenced already in this room. Your programs are specific to your agency. You own them. But if you've got risks that don't fit, and you're straddling both agency boundaries and jurisdictional boundaries, then you're going to have to cooperate and collaborate to do anything that feels the least bit like craftsmanship. So this is unlikely to be a collection of single agency programs, not likely to be it. And persistent risks, which you said in slightly different language, we've still got them. We're still dealing with the cases. But why on earth does this load persist? And I'm sure there's 30 of these, but these are the 6 that jump most quickly to mind and jump most quickly to your minds too. If you've got any of these, you only need one. It makes the case. You need a problem-centered capability, unlikely to be handled effectively by your existing programmatic things. So what have we done this morning? We have looked at 4 basic design dilemmas. You can rattle them off now, right? Legal versus expert. Notice the drift to the expert model. Notice the consequences of explicitly embracing the expert model if you choose to. Plus plus versus minus minus. The balance in your operations between promoting big broad goods and identifying pockets of harm and misery and mopping them up one by one with their different analytic requirements and quite different focus. the importance of decoupling your political communication strategy from your organizational design. The emergence, number 3, the emergence of craftsmanship, the antidote to the swinging of the pendulum that ought to stop forever, the antidote to ideological camps based on tools, which ought to stop forever. Master of all of the tools, I am prepared to use the full range of regulatory instruments, depending on what the task is. And number 4, the one where there seems to be a huge amount of energy in Australian agencies right now, trying not only to develop the problem-centered capability, but to integrate it into the agency, which is a very complicated piece of organizational design. In closing this session, let me just point out that all these major design dilemmas require no change in the law. All of these 4 that we have discussed so far are within your operational daily discretion. That is an enormous amount of choice that you have available to you. Not that you're going to lurch from one thing to the other, but there's a lot of space to develop or change your operational practice without any change in the policy itself, okay? That's as far as we got. We'll look at a couple of others this afternoon that might require some change in the law. Thank you.